Hi, I'm Nora Whitman. I used to believe that every family had its cracks, just a few hairline fractures, nothing that couldn't be mended with love, time, and a little distance. I used to believe mine was no different. That was before I disappeared, before the obituary with my name in bold hit the local paper, before I returned to find my own grave, and three people who were supposed to love me standing over it, smiling. Let me tell you how a family like mine builds a perfect lie, one hug at a time. Our house in Westfield, Connecticut had white siding, blue shutters, and a porch swing that creaked in summer. It was the kind of place that looked like it belonged on a Hallmark card. Warm, welcoming, fake as hell. My mother, Diane, was the orchestrator of that image. She had a voice that could cut glass, but at PTA meetings, it was all polite smiles and lemon squares. My father, Mark, was the quiet type. Retired military, stiff posture, dry eyes. He rarely spoke more than necessary, but when he did, you listened. And then there was Emily, my younger sister. Picture perfect and venomous, Emily was the kind of person who complimented you so precisely, it took hours before you realized she'd gutted you with a smile. They looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. But behind those walls, love was a currency, and I was always overdrafting. I moved out right after college, headed straight for med school in Boston, with a partial scholarship and a lot of pride. I called every Sunday. I visited on holidays. I sent money, not because they asked, but because I thought it meant something. Every check was a way of saying, "Look, I'm good enough now, right?" It never was. When my grandmother passed and left me as sole beneficiary of a small estate, stocks and a trust fund totaling just over $6 million, my mother said it best. "It's only fair," she told me on a call late one night. "You're her favorite. She always coddled you." She said it like an accusation. I didn't think much of it then. I should have. A year later, I signed up for a humanitarian mission in Colombia, 2 months working in rural clinics. It was supposed to be meaningful, a way to breathe again after my residency. I remember the day I left. My mom hugged me stiffly at the airport, whispered, "Be careful," and my father nodded once. Emily didn't show. 3 weeks later, everything went dark. The accident was reported in a one-line email to my university. Dr. Whitman presumed dead after off-road vehicle crash outside Barranquilla. No remains found. But there was no accident. There was a man in a red baseball cap who waved me down on a dirt road. I stopped, thinking he needed help. He had a gun. 2 more men came out of the trees. They took my phone, my ID, everything. I remember the smell of gasoline, of sweat, the way the jungle pressed in like a second skin. And then, nothing. Days blurred into weeks. I was kept alive, barely. I don't know why. Maybe it was luck. Maybe they planned to sell me. Maybe my survival was an accident. 18 months later, I escaped. I clawed my way out, literally, through a rusted tin fence during a rainstorm. A local woman found me, barefoot and bleeding, and helped me contact the embassy. I came back to the States with a scarred body, a burned passport, and the need to know why no one had looked for me. I arrived back in Westfield on a Tuesday morning. It was fall, maples blazing red and gold down every block like nothing had changed. But I had. I was thinner, harder, a ghost of the girl who left. The first place I went wasn't home. It was the cemetery. There it was. Nora Whitman, beloved daughter, sister, lost too soon. The date of death? 1 week after the accident. They buried an empty coffin. I stood there for a long time. The wind blew leaves across my shoes. And then a voice behind me, bright, unbothered. I told Mom the inscription was too much, but you know her, drama queen. Emily. She didn't flinch when I turned. She blinked. Once. Smiled like we were meeting for coffee. "How?" she said, voice like silk over ice. I smiled back, though it didn't reach my eyes. "I'll tell you," I said, "but first, I want to know how the hell you got a death certificate without a body." Her jaw twitched. And just like that, I knew. They did this. They faked my death, and they cashed in on it. Ever looked at your family and realized you were raised in a beautifully packaged nightmare? Yeah, same. There are moments when reality splits. Not like a crack, but like glass under pressure. Quiet, invisible, until suddenly, everything shatters. That's what it felt like, standing across from Emily in the cemetery. My sister, who didn't gasp, didn't cry, didn't scream. She just stared at me like I was a puzzle she hadn't expected to solve today. And somewhere behind that Botox-polished expression, I saw something that terrified me more than the jungle ever did. Relief. Not that I was alive, that I hadn't come back sooner. I left her there. No explanations, no reunion hugs. I didn't need confirmation. Her face said it all. And still, I needed proof. Not for the police, not for a lawyer, but for me. Because there's a special kind of poison in doubting your own memory, your own trauma, your own blood. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. So I started with the obvious. My death certificate. The town records office was 2 blocks from the church where they'd held my memorial service. The woman behind the counter had purple glasses and the kind of cheerful tone that could only come from working a job with no emotional stakes. She tapped at her keyboard, then squinted at the screen. "Whitman, Nora?" she asked. I nodded, feeling the fake skin on my palms where the machete scars had never fully healed. "Yup. Certified copy of the death certificate was filed here 18 months ago. Cause of death: presumed fatal injuries from motor vehicle accident. Declared by family proxy. Signed by Dr. Mark Whitman." My father. My retired military father hadn't just mourned me. He'd forged a death certificate. My voice came out steady, colder than I felt. "Can I get a copy?" She printed it without hesitation. "Glad to hear you're not as dead as our system says," she said with a chuckle. I didn't laugh. I walked out, clutching a paper that officially said I was 6 feet under. Next stop, the insurance company. I knew my grandmother's policy had been managed by Hartford Federal Mutual. I'd signed papers years ago, back when I was too young to understand their meaning. But I remembered her saying once, "It's for your future, sweetheart. They'll protect you if I'm not here." What a cruel joke. The woman who met me in the lobby was younger than I expected. Professional, blazer crisp. But when I showed her my ID and told her my story in 3 carefully measured minutes, her expression shifted. Less corporate, more human. "We can't just disclose that kind of information," she said, "unless you're legally confirmed to be Nora Whitman, which you are, but you're also listed as deceased." "I have a passport," I said, showing her the newly issued government doc with my photo, my fingerprint, my return date. She paused. Then she leaned in, lowered her voice. "We paid out $6 million last year. The claim came from your immediate family. There was an expedited process, which was unusual." "Unusual how?" "The claim was filed 10 days after your disappearance. Most life insurance policies require at least 6 months for presumed death without a body. But your father had a waiver. Military benefits. That sped up the process. 6 million. 10 days. My body hadn't even been cold. Or in this case, hadn't even been missing. They didn't wait. They weren't grieving. They were planning. I spent the next week living out of a cheap motel on the edge of town. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Home was compromised. Home had turned on me. Instead, I dug. I hired a private investigator named Miles Cole, retired NYPD, recommended by a trauma counselor I met at the embassy. He didn't ask many questions, but he took the folder I'd assembled: fake death cert, insurance payout info, my new passport. 3 days later, he texted, "You're gonna want to see this in person." We met in a diner off Route 84. He slid a USB across the table with a cup of coffee. "What is it?" I asked. "Security footage. Your sister, 3 weeks after your death. At a Lexus dealership in Stamford." Buying a new car? Cash? That's not illegal, I said quietly. No, but this might be. He showed me a second clip. My mother, Diane, sitting in a lawyer's office with a man I didn't recognize. Not our family attorney. This guy's a known fraud facilitator, Miles said. Used to work in estate manipulation. Your mom paid him $5,000 in cash. The timeline lined up too perfectly. I wasn't missing a month before they were cashing out. I also pulled travel records, he added. No one filed missing person reports. No embassy inquiries. No search. Nothing. My throat tightened. They hadn't even looked. I sat in that booth for a long time after Miles left. Long enough that my coffee went cold. Long enough that the waitress started to hover. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and texted a number I hadn't used in almost 2 years. 2. Emily, message. We need to talk. Bring Dad. Don't bring lies. The meeting was set at the only place neutral enough not to trigger full-blown chaos, the back patio of the club where my mother volunteered. I picked it because they'd behave in public, because they cared about image more than truth. Emily arrived first, latte in hand, outfit pristine. My father showed 5 minutes later, jaw clenched, the way it always was when he felt cornered. You're alive, he said. Not a question, just a statement. So it would seem, I replied. Emily sat down slowly, eyes scanning me like I might still disappear again. What do you want? I placed the documents between us. Death cert, insurance payout, the Lexus purchase, the fraud guy. I want answers, my father exhaled. You were gone. We thought you were dead. Bullshit, I snapped. You hoped I was dead. Emily's mask cracked, just for a second. Just long enough for me to see it. The truth. Then it was gone. I don't know what fantasy you're chasing, she said, but you're not going to ruin this family's life because you had a midlife jungle crisis. I laughed once, bitter and sharp. Ruin? Emily, I came back from the dead. You buried me in an empty box and used it to buy a luxury car. She stood. You should be grateful we even held a service. Careful, I said softly. That sounded a lot like a confession. They left together, tense and silent. And I sat there, staring at the place they'd been, hands trembling. This wasn't over. This was war. Ever confronted someone you once trusted and realized they weren't even pretending to be sorry? Just indifferent? It didn't take long for the town to start whispering. They'd buried me. They'd lit candles for me. I was the tragedy that brought casseroles to the porch and prayers into the church bulletin. So when I walked into Chase Bank that Monday morning, heads turned like I was a specter. I smiled at the teller, Rachel, who'd gone to high school with Emily and had once borrowed my biology notes to pass a midterm. Hi, I said, placing my ID and a worn bank card on the counter. I'd like to access my account. She glanced at the name. Her eyes widened. Nora? Back from the dead, I said gently, but the humor fell flat. She hesitated, then typed something. Her brows pulled together. This account was closed last year, transferred in full to a joint estate account under the name Diane Whitman. What? Her voice dropped to a whisper. There was a death certificate. Your mother presented it. She had court authorization to transfer your assets. They hadn't just claimed my life insurance. They stole every dollar I'd ever earned. My bank account, my trust, the investment portfolio I built from my residency pay. I felt it then. Not like a betrayal, but like a blade pressed slow and deep between the ribs. They cleaned me out, I whispered. Rachel looked stricken. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. It's okay, I lied. This isn't on you. But it was on someone. And they were about to feel it. I stormed out of the bank, blood roaring in my ears, and drove straight to the lawyer's office my family had used for years. Michael Latham, a man who once gave me Werther's caramels during my grandmother's will reading. He didn't recognize me at first. His assistant nearly called security when I pushed past her desk. Then he saw my face. Nora. You did it, I said. You gave them legal access to my estate. You signed off on my accounts. Michael turned pale. I was presented with full documentation, a signed death certificate, a notarized affidavit. Mark and Diane were listed as next of kin. You didn't question the lack of a body? He blinked. I trusted your family, he said, as if that were some sacred defense. Well, I didn't, I snapped. Not anymore. Miles met me back at the motel that evening with coffee and a manila envelope. Got the medical records? He said. You're gonna want to sit down. I didn't. He handed me the report. It was a digital file with forged hospital records from a clinic in Bogota. Fabricated death scene photos, falsified doctor's notes, even a scanned signature from a non-existent coroner. It was disturbingly thorough. Where the hell did they get this? He shrugged. Whoever your mom hired knew what they were doing. This wasn't DIY fraud. This was surgical. What do we do? Miles leaned back. You want legal? We can start building a case. But that takes time. You want the public? We go loud. Media, social, pressure. I looked at the photo of my own corpse. A woman with hair like mine, skin darkened, features burned out of recognition. Not yet, I said. We go quiet. We let them think they've won. Miles smiled. That's the spirit. But that night, I broke. Not loudly, not with sobs, just a quiet, pulsing rage under my skin. I sat on the motel bed, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of the TV, and I didn't recognize the woman looking back. What do you do when your family sells your life like a business transaction? You don't scream, you don't beg, you rebuild, piece by piece, until the reckoning feels earned. 3 days after the confrontation with my father and sister, I sat outside the Whitman family home in a borrowed sedan, with the windows cracked just enough to hear the wind. The house looked the same hydrangeas, same white siding, but everything about it felt hostile now. It didn't matter that I'd grown up inside those walls. That house wasn't mine anymore. It was a crime scene. Are you sure about this? Miles asked, sitting in the passenger seat with a GoPro rig and 2 clip-on mics. No, I replied, but it's not about being sure. It's about being done. The plan was simple. Bait the truth. Miles had helped me rig a hidden recorder, and my goal was to get one of them, any of them, to say too much. People confess all the time when they think no one's really listening, especially when they think they're still in control. I rang the bell. Diane answered. She froze, just for a beat. Then the mask clicked on. Nora, sweetheart, you look... well. That lie tasted expensive. I want my things, I said flatly. Clothes, photos, the box from Grandma. Her smile faltered. Of course. I'll help you pack. We moved through the foyer like strangers at a wake. I touched nothing. She pointed politely. Neither of us believed the performance. In my old bedroom, dust clung to the windowsills. It smelled like lavender and lies. Diane stood near the closet, pulling down boxes like this was a normal Sunday chore. You should understand, she said finally, folding a blanket. We thought you were gone. Emily was inconsolable. Mark, he barely spoke for weeks. I turned. No one filed a missing persons report. She didn't flinch. We were told by the embassy you were likely deceased. That's not what they told me. Diane paused, fingers still. You always had a flair for dramatics, Nora, even as a child. There it was. The shift. The slip. You mean like faking my death? I asked, voice low. Her eyes flashed, just for a second, but enough. You were a ghost, a missing name in a foreign file, and we were left to clean up the pieces. No, you swept the pieces into a vault and slammed the door. I moved closer. You didn't just steal my money. You stole my future, my life. She looked at me like I was a stranger on her porch. We took what was necessary, she said coldly. You owe us that much. I walked out without the boxes, but I had the recording. That night, Miles and I listened to it on loop. Her tone, her phrasing, the cold clarity. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was close. "They're slipping," he said. "She's trying to rationalize it. That's the crack." "I want more," I replied. "Not just implication. I want intent. I want conspiracy. I want them begging for leniency." Miles nodded. "Then we push harder." That push came faster than we planned. 2 days later, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. From Jonah Reyes. Subject: "What happened to you?" Jonah had been a friend once, a serious one, pre-med, study partner, almost more. We'd lost touch during residency, but I remembered him as one of the few people who never wanted anything from me but time. We met at a coffee shop in New Haven. He stared at me for a long time, like trying to verify a ghost. "You were dead." "I got better," I said. He didn't laugh. "Why reach out now?" I asked. "Because something felt off back then. When you went missing, I asked around. No one would answer. I called your parents. They said not to contact them again." I felt that old ache, familiar and heavy. Jonah leaned in. "I've been in touch with someone from Colombia, a woman from the village near where you disappeared. She remembered you. Said some men had taken you, that someone American came around later asking questions." I froze. "No one was supposed to know I was alive." "Someone did," Jonah said, "before you escaped." That night, I sat on the motel bed again, staring at the blank TV. But it didn't feel like despair this time. It felt like motion. They hadn't just capitalized on my absence. They'd insured it. Somebody had paid to keep me gone. And suddenly, this wasn't just betrayal. It was attempted murder. What if your own mother looked you in the eye and told you your life was collateral damage? How do you come back from that? The sun was setting when Jonah called. "She's willing to talk," he said. "The woman in Colombia. Her name's Marina. But not over the phone. She wants face-to-face. She's scared." I looked at the tickets Jonah had booked for me, NYC to Cartagena. My palms were already sweating. "Does she know who paid them?" "She doesn't have names," he said. "But she has faces, documents, something she kept, in case she ever needed protection." Flying back into the country where I'd nearly died wasn't easy. Every moment in the airport felt like a relapse, like I was about to be dragged off by strangers again. But I had one mission: tie the noose with the truth. If they paid someone to keep me gone, I wanted to know who, and I wanted to know why. Marina lived in a quiet village about 2 hours from Barranquilla, deep inland. Her home was modest: tin roof, mango trees in the yard. But she greeted us with eyes that had seen too much. "You don't forget the face of a girl who cried every night like she wasn't meant to survive," she said in Spanish. She remembered me. I remembered her too. She was the one who smuggled me antibiotics when my leg was infected. She had risked everything for a stranger. And now I was back, stronger, but still healing. Marina opened a shoebox lined with old envelopes. Inside, photocopies of American passports, wire transfer receipts, photos of 3 men, one of whom I remembered clearly. He was the one with the red baseball cap, the one who pulled me from my car. But there was more. A business card. Vanguard Global Claims and Recovery, Mark Whitman. Risk consultant, my father. The title was fake, but the link was real. They hadn't just claimed my death. They'd orchestrated it. Marina pointed to a faded slip of paper with a set of numbers scrawled in blue ink. "That man paid $20,000 to the gang that took you, paid more to keep you off the grid. He said it was insurance, that no one would come looking." Jonah's hand closed into a fist. I couldn't breathe. He paid for silence. He paid for my absence. The flight home was silent. I watched the clouds and thought about the way my father never hugged me as a child. How he measured affection like rations. Now I knew why. I was never real to him. I was a variable, a line on a spreadsheet. Back in Connecticut, Miles met me at the motel. I handed him the photos, the receipts, the business card. "I want this in front of a judge," I said. "You'll get it," he promised. "But Nora, this changes the charges. We're talking conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder, international crime. I nodded. I want them exposed. I want every person who enabled this to answer for it. He looked at me for a long time. You're not scared? I am, I whispered. But I've been through worse. The courthouse smelled like varnished wood, and consequence. I sat in the hallway, back straight, hands folded in my lap like I was waiting for something sacred. In a way, I was. Not revenge, not even justice. Just the truth, finally spoken out loud, in a room where lies carried legal weight. Across from me, Diane sipped coffee from a travel mug that probably cost more than my entire suitcase. Emily scrolled her phone, eyes glazed, legs crossed like she was waiting for a nail appointment. And my father? Mark sat like a statue, shoulders squared, chin tilted just slightly upward. Defiant. Controlled. They hadn't said a word to me since the charges were filed. Miles stood next to me, calm as ever, briefcase in one hand, the other tucked into his coat. He leaned down slightly. You ready for this? I nodded. I had no choice. The courtroom wasn't full, but it buzzed with a kind of quiet heat. A few reporters, a few community members, a court sketch artist whose pen moved like it had seen too many faces like mine, too many women stitched back together from betrayal. The assistant district attorney, Layla Connors, opened the case like she was slicing into a cake, measured, but meant to expose the layers. This is not just a case of fraud, she said, addressing the court. This is a story of deliberate deception, abuse of trust, and a coordinated effort to erase a life for financial gain. Mark's attorney objected. Inflammatory language. Overruled. Then the evidence began. Marina's affidavit, her signed testimony describing the transaction, the falsified medical reports, the death certificate with my father's signature, video clips from the Lexus dealership, audio of Diane saying, "We took what was necessary." And then I took the stand. The courtroom felt colder once I was up there, like the air itself could sense what was about to unravel. Miss Whitman, Layla asked gently, can you describe what you experienced after your disappearance? I nodded. I was kidnapped by 3 armed men on a rural road in Colombia, held for over a year. No one came looking. I didn't know why, until I came home and found out I'd been declared dead. And what did you discover about your family upon returning? They had filed a life insurance claim. They had emptied my bank accounts. They buried an empty coffin and went on with their lives. Not one report, not one call to the embassy. Nothing. Silence settled over the room like dust. And did you find out who paid your captors? Yes, I said, voice steady. My father, Mark Whitman. Mark flinched, for the first time. I looked at him directly. You didn't just fake my death, I said louder now. You tried to make it real. His lawyer objected again, motioned to strike. But the judge didn't strike it. Instead, she turned to Mark. Mr. Whitman, do you wish to respond? He stood slowly. My daughter was reckless, he said, voice cold. She made dangerous choices. We were told she wouldn't come back. I made decisions based on that information. So you paid a gang to silence her? Layla asked. I protected our family, he snapped. She left us no other option. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Diane didn't look up. Emily stared straight ahead, unreadable. The session adjourned with enough evidence to move to full trial. But the real shift happened outside. As we exited the building, a reporter called out, Nora, what do you want from all this? I paused, not for the cameras, for myself. I want them to stop calling it a tragedy, I said. It was never an accident. It was a choice, and now they get to live with it. The trial lasted 12 days. 12 days of watching my life be dissected like a cadaver. Every photo, every check, every lie. They were all laid out under fluorescent lights and scrutinized by strangers. There was something hauntingly poetic about it, The people who once made me feel invisible were now the subject of national headlines. Whitman family fraud. Daughter declared dead testifies against her parents. My face had become a symbol for something bigger than me: survival, betrayal, retribution. But that didn't make it any easier. The worst part wasn't the testimonies, it was watching my mother avoid my gaze. Diane never looked at me once. Not when the prosecution laid out her bank records. Not when the judge read aloud the audio recording of her saying, "I owed them my life." And not when the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty. All three. Conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and in my father's case, attempted murder. The moment the verdict was read, Emily's composure cracked. She stood there trembling in her designer coat, eyes darting toward me like she finally saw me. Not as a sister, not even as a threat, but as something worse. A mirror. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Later, in the hallway outside the courtroom, Layla approached me. "You know you could sue for damages," she said. "You'd win. Civil restitution, plus what's left from the life insurance." I nodded. "I might, but that's not why I came back." She smiled. "You're one of the few people I've seen who wasn't after money in a case like this." "Because I know what it costs," I said. In the months that followed, I became a reluctant name in headlines. News outlets ran pieces on my story. Podcasts reached out. Documentarians offered money. I said no to almost all of it. Not because I didn't want the story told, but because I wanted to tell it in my way. So I started with one letter. To the family of another woman, one whose face looked like mine, whose body had never been found. Her name was Rosa Jimenez. Marina told me the gang had once taken someone else, years before me. They never found her. But I did. Not the body, just her name. And now, her name was in my story. A small thread of justice in a world that had left hers untied. I spent most of that year in upstate New York, staying with Jonah's aunt while I rebuilt my identity. I didn't return to medicine right away. I wasn't ready to hold other people's pain while mine still pulsed. Instead, I built something else. A nonprofit. The Whitman Project. A bitter name for a better purpose. To expose family-based financial abuse. To provide legal guidance for victims of identity theft and fraud from within their own households. I never imagined my face would be on a pamphlet, or that I'd sit on panels next to trauma specialists. But it felt real. Not like healing, more like rebuilding, brick by jagged brick. One spring evening, I stood outside the courthouse again, this time for a survivors event. I wore a simple black blazer, my hair back, no makeup. A girl approached me after the speech. Maybe 19, thin wrists, sharp eyes. "I thought I was the only one," she said quietly. "You're not," I told her, "and you never were." Months later, I returned to the house I grew up in. It was up for auction now, seized by the state. The hydrangeas were dead, the shutters faded, but the porch swing was still there. I walked through the empty rooms, every step echoing like memory. In my old bedroom, I left something behind. A photo of me and Grandma, taped to the inside of the closet wall. She was the only one who ever told me I was enough. And somehow, her love still echoed louder than their betrayal. That night, I drove away with the windows down, the wind tangling my hair, and a playlist I hadn't touched in years humming through the car. Not because everything was fixed, not because I'd won, but because I was still here, still moving, still mine. Some wounds don't leave scars on the skin. They live in your choices, your silence, and how you choose to move forward. If my story taught me anything, it's this. Sometimes the people who were supposed to protect you will be the ones who hurt you most deeply. But survival is more than staying alive. It's choosing not to let their betrayal define you. It's fighting for your truth, even when your voice shakes. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone close? What did you learn about yourself through it? If this video resonated with you, leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching from or what part of the story struck you the hardest. And hey, if you didn't like it, I still want to hear from you. What didn't land? If you're new here and this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story that might just change the way you see the world.